Deal.
All right, excellent. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. It's good to be together this evening. Shalom Remembers is an expression of one of our most solemn and communal responsibilities to stand as witnesses in a world that too often fails to recognize the unique and tragic history of the Holocaust, and to renew our commitment to the words that must never become only a slogan: never forget. We gather tonight not only to remember what was destroyed, but also to honor what endured. We remember the generation who suffered the horrors of the Holocaust, and we honor the courage, resilience, and faith it took to create new lives, new homes, and living families despite it all. We're especially grateful this evening to Nancy Kennedy Barnett, whose enthusiasm and deep commitment to telling the story of that generation has helped shape this program. Nancy, we're grateful that you'll be sharing your family's story with us tonight, and in doing so, you help all of us understand that history is never only history. It lives in families and memory and in the responsibility we pass from one generation to the next. We're also grateful to the Nathan and Esther Pelz Holocaust Education Resource Center for partnering with Congregation Shalom on this evening and for helping prepare our young people to ask important, thoughtful, and sensitive questions of our survivor families. That preparation teaches our students that memory requires care, and it teaches them that testimony is sacred, and it teaches them that when we listen well, we become part of the chain of remembrance. So thank you to Samantha Goldberg, the teacher of these young people and an integral part of HERC's work, and to Samantha Abramson, the executive director of HERC, for helping make this evening possible. We're also deeply grateful to the students who worked to prepare for this evening and who interviewed our survivor family members. So that is Hannah Chertkov, Raina Knudsen, Serafina Schneider, Lorelei Cox, Marie Burkhoff, and Lily Wilgreen. And we're grateful to the survivor family members who entrusted our students and our congregation with their stories: Judy Silberman, Marty Thau, Sue Bernstein. And thank you for helping us carry memory forward. I also want to thank Brian Avner for his work on this project, Megan Ryder-Guterman and Paul Kasten for bringing beautiful and poignant music to the Shabbat, and Jim Varga for editing the video that we will see tonight. There's a phrase from our tradition, Zachor, remember. But Jewish memory is never something that we do as passive observers. We don't remember only by looking backward. We remember by allowing the past to shape who we become and how we teach and how we speak, how we build community, and how we protect the dignity of every human being. So may this evening be a reflection of that commitment our congregation makes together, that these lives, these stories, and this history will not be forgotten. So let us begin our service by greeting each other with the beautiful words of Shalom Aleichem, which can be found in your Siddur on page 24. That's page 24.
Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Mimelech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Mimelech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yai Lai Lai, Boachem L'Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu Ni L'Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu Nil Shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yailai Tzedchem L'Shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
So tonight I'd like to invite Samantha Abramson as well as all the members here of the Holocaust Education Resource Center's executive and board to step forward to light our Shabbat candles. Those candles, that light is always a reflection of the soulful qualities of those who light them and kindle them. And the light of candles is always a gesture of peace and holiness and welcome, but tonight it carries an added depth. These flames remind us that even after the darkest chapters of human history, Jewish life continued. Families were rebuilt. Songs were sung again. Children and grandchildren were born. Communities gathered around tables and in sanctuaries, and light returned. And so as these candles are kindled, we honor not only memory but resilience. We honor that lives that were taken and the lives that were built. We honor the stories entrusted to us and the responsibilities to carry them forward. May these Shabbat lights remind us that memory itself can be a flame passed carefully from generation to generation, never allowed to go out. We turn back in our Siddur to page 2. Page 2.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat.
We turn now to page 20 as we join together in the singing of L'chad Odi. It is our custom here at Congregation Shalom that as we come to the final verse of L'chad Odi, that we rise, we face the door through which we arrived, and we bow on the final words, Bawi Kala, to greet the Sabbath bride. So let us join together now in the singing of L'chad Odi, which can be found on page 20.
Ishmianu el hamichad מותרת בלגן בשמחה ובצהלתו אמוני עם סגולה בואי חלה לך דודי לקראת קלה פני שבת נקבלה לך דודי לקראת קלה פני שבת נקבלה.
We turn now in our Siddur to page 27 as we read responsively. Teach me, O God, a blessing, a prayer on the mystery of a withered leaf, on ripened fruits so fair, on the freedom to see, to sense, to breathe, to know, to hope, to despair. Teach my lips a blessing, a hymn of praise, as each morning and night you renew your days. Lest my day be today as the one before, lest routines set my ways. We turn back to page 26 and join together in the Chatzi Kaddish.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה.
Amen.
בעלמא יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי.
בחייכון וביומכון ובחיידךו בית ישראל. בגלה בגלה ובזמן קריב.
וימרו
אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם ולעולמיה יתברך.
יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה
תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמא.
וימרו
Amen. Entrances to holiness are everywhere. The possibility of ascent is all the time, even at unlikely times and through unlikely places. There is no place on earth without the presence. We rise now as we turn to the call to worship on page 28. We continue now in the English on page 31. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Your wisdom sets the way on which time and season glide. Your breath guides the sail of the stars. Creator of the tide of time and light, you guide the current of day into night as heaven spans to infinity. You set its course for eternity. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Baruch atah Adonai, hama'ariv aravim. We continue now with Ahavat Olam on page 32.
Yisrael, Amecha
Ve'ahavdecha al tasir mimenu le'olamim. Baruch atah Adonai, ohev amo Yisrael. We join together now in the watchword of our faith, the Shema.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevon Malchutah, Le'olam Va'ed.
You may be seated. We continue with Ve'ahavta on page 36.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם נאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם אלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם
Adonai Elohechem Emet. Let's read responsively at the bottom of page 39. In a world torn by violence and pain, a world far from wholeness and peace, give us the courage to say, Adonai, there is one God in heaven and earth. The high heavens declare your glory. May earth reveal your justice and love. From bondage in Egypt we were delivered. At Sinai we bound ourselves to your way. Inspired by prophets and instructed by sages, time and again we overcame oppressive forces. Though our failings are many and our faults are great, it has been our glory to bear witness to our God, keeping alive in dark ages your vision of a world redeemed. Let us continue to work for the day when the nations will be one and at peace. Then shall we rejoice as Israel did, singing on the shores of the sea.
Ya bye bye bim bim bam, ya bye bye bim bam, ya ba ba bim bim bam, ya bye bye bim bam, ay 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 ay, ya bye bye bim bam, ay 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 ay, ya bye bye bim bam, mi chamocha bailim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh, norati Lord. Seifele, norati Lord, o seifele, ma'alechutecha ra'u vanecha, bokei hayam lifnei Moshe u'Miriam, ze'eli ze'eliyanu ve'amru, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, yai bai bai bim bim bam, yai bai bai bim bam, yai bai bim bim bam, ya bye bye bim bam, ay 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 bye bim bam, ay 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 ya bye bye bim bam.
V'ne'emar kif Adonai yet Yaakov u'golo miyad chazak mimenu. Baruch atah Adonai ga'al Yisrael. We turn now in our Siddur to page 43. Let us read together from the top of the page. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai, help us to walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts, that we may lie down in peace and rise up, waiting to do your will. Baruch atah Adonai, haporei sukkot shalom, aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael, ve'al Yerushalayim. We continue now with V'shamru on page 44.
V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל, אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם.
We are a people in whom the past endures, in whom the present is inconceivable without moments gone by. The Exodus lasted a moment enduring forever. What happened once upon a time happens all the time. We rise now as we turn to the tefillah on page 46. Page 46.
Adonai tzifatai tiftach uvi yagi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, v'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibur v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Konei Hakol, V'Zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imahot, Umevi Geula Livnei B'neihem, Leman Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Ozer u'Moshia u'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham v'Ezrat Sarah. Atah gibur le'olam Adonai, Mechayei hakol atarav lehoshiav, Morid hatal, Mechakel chayim bechesed, Mechayei hakol berachamim rabim, Somek novlim v'rofeh cholim, Umatir asurim, Umakayem emunato lishenei afar, Michamocha ba'al gevurot, Umido melach, Melech memit umechayeh, Umatzmiach Yeshua, V'ne'eman atah lahachayot hakol. Baruch atah Adonai, מחיי הכל. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש.
We are now going to continue reading silently to ourselves, reading silently from page 54 all the way through page 62. And when you may read either from the right-hand side or the left-hand side of the Siddur, but when you have finished reciting your prayers silently to yourselves, you may be seated.
This next song that you are about to hear, Nitkein Rojinkas, Nitkein Mandolin, No More Raisins, No More Almonds, is a song that was written and performed in the Łódź Ghetto Theater. The music was composed by David Begelman while he was in the ghetto. He was transported to Auschwitz in 1944 and was murdered shortly after. The lyrics were written by the poet Isaiah Spiegel. He was also in the ghetto with Begelman. He was transported to Auschwitz also in 1944, but survived, and thankfully many of his works went on to be published. This is a negative version of the famous lullaby, Rojinkas mit Mandolin, Raisins and Almonds, perhaps one of the best-known songs of Yiddish theater, if not all Yiddish songs. The ghetto version declares, no raisins, no almonds. Father, who has not gone trading, will never come back home. Where did he go? To the world's end. Nature is personified, owls and wolves identify and sympathize with the man going who knows where. The song's melody does not quote or parody Goldfaden's original tune, but you might hear something familiar in the introduction. is needs gefahren handeln, Julinge mein Sohn, Julinge mein Sohn. Hat verlud uns unerweckt, wo die Welt hat nur aneck, Julinge mein Sohn, Julinge mein Sohn. Sie schreien so bis Wein werf, Gott der Barm sich unhöf, Julinge mein Sohn, Julinge mein Sohn. Geht stund unerwacht, Mandeln Rogen gesassach, Julinge mein Sohn, Julinge mein Sohn. Kommen Rewet auf sicher Scheun, send ich Kind meinen Sekreun, Julinge mein Sohn, Julinge mein Sohn.
In the echoes of this beautiful and haunting melody, we take a moment and think of members of our community who might be in need of refuat nefesh or refuat guf, a healing of spirit or a healing of body. Particularly in our hearts and minds, we're thinking of Steve Toplinsky, Fern Drescher, Gershon ben Avraham, Pesha Bluma bat Esther, Azrael ben Rivka Vishlomo, Mark Kleinerman, Miriam bat Rachel, Rachel bat Devorah, Shira bat Velva Vimalka, Yisrael Mordechai, Deanna Duker, Rachel Zeram, Ronald Ryder, Barbara Gorski Jacobson, Dick Miller, Leah bat Velma, Stuart Willis, Carrie Zimmel, Keith Mandel, Carolyn Newman, Kelly Adiniak, George Grimm, Patrick Hepe, Gary Elderbrook, Harleen Fox, Ray Cormier, Daniel David ben Mayor, Danielle David ben Mayoral Nahama, Hannah Loyo, Brett Stock, Natalie Brown-Gutnick, Joyce Paulson, Richard Gralton, Philip Meckler, Eileen Staller, Ruth Beck, Dina Sasha Rochel, Howard Sosaf, Margalit Moskowitz, Lawrence Frazen, and Ben Jones. If there are names that should be added to this list or names that should be pronounced differently than I did, I invite you to hold those names in your heart at this time as we say words from our tradition. Baruch atah Adonai, Rofei HaCholim. Blessed are you, the source of healing. We turn in our prayer books to page 253, and there you will find the Mishaberach.
Source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a
We find ourselves in a period of counting from the end of Pesach to Shavuot, this time in which we feel a sense of connection to each other and to the divine. And so we turn in our prayer books to page 278, and we rise together as we collectively perform the mitzvah of Sfirat HaOmer, the mitzvah of counting the Omer.
Yai lai lai la lai 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 la la lai 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 la la lai 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 Yai lai la la lai 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 Yai lai lai la la lai 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 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sefirat ha'omer hayom sholashim yoshehem arba'a shavuot u'shnei yamim la'omer Yai lai la la lai 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 la la lai Yai lai lai la la lai 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 Yai lai la la lai lai Yai lai 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 Yai lai 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 lai
Today is the 30th day, which is 4 weeks and 2 days of the Omer. We turn now in our Siddur to page 282, and it's a great joy to call upon all those young people who worked on creating Shalom Remembers and interviewing our survivor families. So Marie, that is you. I see you over to the right, and all of you to the left. If you would come forward and open up our ark doors, and we will turn to page 282.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon ha'kol, l'atid gedula liotzer breshit, shelo asanu kagoy ha'aratzot, velo samanu kamishbechot ha'adama, shelo sam chelkeinu kahem, v'gor aleinu kacho ha'molam, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתוקקים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד
You may be seated. We turn now to memory as we think of dear ones who passed into life eternal. There's a beautiful version of El Malei Rachamim, a prayer that was composed during the Second Crusades, a time that as the Crusaders moved across Europe, they burned synagogues and massacred Jews en masse. And out of that pain and out of that trial and out of that despair, Jewish communities came together and wrote a prayer that called upon God to take those people, those dear loved ones who had entered into eternity under their wings. And there have been many different versions of El Malei Rachamim throughout this year, this God who's full of mercy, God abundant in mercy, calling upon God to take our dear ones into God's presence. And so today we will recite the El Malei for those who experienced the Shoah, who perished during the Shoah. We rise together now as a community as we recite these sacred words.
El male rachamim shochem amromim hamsei menucha nechona tachat kanfei hashechina v'ma'alor kedoshim u'tehorim kezohar harakiyah masirim lenishmot 6 million achenu v'achiotenu shenehergu kiddush Hashem harachamim yastirim b'sete knavav leolamim v'yitzror b'yitzror hachayim et nishmatam Adonai hu nachalatam v'yanuchu b'shalom amishkavam v'nomar Amen.
Fully compassionate God on high, to our 6 million brothers and sisters murdered because they were Jews, grant clear and certain rest with you in the lofty heights of the sacred and pure, whose brightness shines like the very glow of heaven. Source of mercy, forever enfold them in the embrace of your wings. Secure their souls in eternity. Adonai, they are yours. They will rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. We continue now as we think of dear ones who passed into life eternal during this period of Shloshim. We remember Ann Becker, Susan Berger, Rosalie Gelman, Austin Greenberg, Sarah Hilmert, Ralph Hoffman, Joan Mandel, Evelyn Rosen, Howard Schnoll, and Dennis Weissman. In addition to those names, so too do we think of those for whom we commemorate their yahrzeit on this evening. We remember Philip Abrams, Marvin Arnold, Noah Arnold, Mildred Sakarni Asbel, Lillian Asher, Pearl Atinsky, Sarah Barron, Sybil Becker, Arline Bloom, Edith Brin, Harold Chattis, Joyce Cohen, Lena Cohen, Esther Emanuel, Julius Garber, Barbara Bressler Garson, Abraham Glickman, Felicia Grant, Beryl Harris, Herman Hinden, Robert Hurwitz, Rabbi Gordon Geller, Carol Kegelman, Bernard Keller, Harry Kravitz, Irving Kurzberg, Harvey Curzon, Sanford Liederman, David Levine, Gerald Levine, Joseph Mantle, Sarah Cole Mazer, Cyril Newman, Pearl Alswang, Stuart Peckerman, Saul Rapkin, Bennett Rosenberg, Renee Sadowski, Ben Safer, Ann Sager, Samuel Sinnigan, Pearl Stoller, Gisha Swernoff, Iva Teplin, and Ann Wayne. If there are names that should be pronounced differently than I did, or names that should be added to this list, or if you're commemorating the yahrzeit of a loved one, please do call those names out loud as I look in your direction. May his memory be for a blessing. In addition to the names of our loved ones, so too do we think of all those who died due to war and or terrorism, all those who died in defense of this nation and allied nations' ideals. We think of all those who died due to the terrible viruses of racism and xenophobia, as well as all those who perished during the Holocaust. Our griefs and sympathies are mingled as we turn to words sanctified by memory, words glorified by hope. The Kaddish Yatom, the mourner's Kaddish, can be found on page 294. We recite these sacred words together. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah, v'yalma divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabba mivorach leolam ulamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'pa'ar v'tromam v'itnaseh. V'itadar v'italev v'itolal shmei dekudesha brichu. La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Da'amiran bi'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav. Hu yaseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn and comfort to all who are bereaved. And let us say, amen. You may be seated. In our tradition, we are taught those who sow in tears shall reap in joy. And so it's always right that our tradition should turn from sadness to joy. It's a joy now to call upon Steve Wallace, our immediate past president of Congregation Shalom, who's going to come up and he's going to share some announcements on behalf of our congregation. As soon as Steve is done, I'm going to call upon Brian Avner, who's our director of congregational learning, and he'll follow Steve, who's going to introduce the program for this evening. So Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It really is a privilege to be with all of you as we learn together and as we remember.
Thank you, Steve. Good evening, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. Tonight's service will feature the Shalom Remembers Project. We'll hear testimonies from the families of survivors, interview highlights from our 7th grade Shalom interviewers, and we'll have a special feature with Nancy Kennedy Barnett sharing her family's story. Congregation Shalom will then host the Cream City Beit Midrash on May 4th at 6 o'clock p.m. in celebration of Lag BaOmer. They'll present Love is a Verb, Jewish wisdom for building meaningful relationships. Please join us for our Osher programs this coming week, May 6th at 2:15. The topic will be Mindfulness in Every Life, and May 7th at 2:15, Mysterious Mahjong. Our next Lador Vador Shabbat dinner and service will be May 8th. Dinner begins at 5:30 p.m., followed by the Siyum HaSefer and Teacher Appreciation Shabbat at 6:30 p.m., and an Oneg, of course, will follow the service. May 15th is the MCRC Shabbat, hosted by Congregation Emmanuel B'nai Jeshurin. The service starts at 7 o'clock in the evening and featuring a guest speaker, Alana Khan, who will be speaking on resilience in time of rising hate. There will be no service that evening at Congregation Shalom. May 20th is our Seeds of the Future Town Hall meeting. Over the past few years, Congregation Shalom has been engaged in important and thoughtful work to explore our future. We encourage you to attend this meeting so we can share where we are, what we've learned, and what comes next for Congregation Shalom. Please do RSVP and submit any questions you may have that you'd like answered in particular by May 18th. Celebrate Shavuot with us at these events. May 21st is our confirmation service at 6 o'clock in the evening. Mazel tov to the confirmands. May 22nd is the Yizkor service starting at 10 o'clock in the morning, then Shabbat service in the evening at 6 p.m. with musical guest High Voltage. Our clergy will be scooping ice cream at Baskin-Robbins in Bayside on Sunday, May 24th from 1 to 3 in the afternoon. The administrative office will be closed on Friday, May 22nd for Shavuot, and on Monday, May 25th for Memorial Day. Women of Shalom are selling Bayside Garden Center gift cards. Please check out our website for your weekly email to purchase. Every Friday from 11 to 12, join us for coffee, tea at our Shalom Schmooze. It's a casual setting to simply be together, share conversation, and build community. Join us Saturdays, 9 o'clock in the morning for Torah study, and 10 o'clock where follows our community Shabbat service. We enjoy a lunch together following those services. Look for further information on all our programs in Pivar Foyer, and please watch your shofar, emails, Facebook, and the webpage for all of Shalom's happenings. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Steve. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So the Shalom Remembers Project is something that has been in process for most of this school year. It began kind of with the confluence of two ideas. One was knowing that Nancy Kennedy Barnett was going to be speaking and sharing her father's story tonight, and her encouragement of having others have their stories be shared tonight as well, that it wasn't only her story to tell, but there are many stories within our congregation. And at the same time, our seventh graders, and I believe it started specifically with Hannah, but included many of our seventh graders, were looking to do their B Mitzvah projects, an educational or social action project to do at the same time as they are becoming a B Mitzvah. And she was interested in the idea of Holocaust survivors and hearing their stories. And so it became this perfect meeting spot to invite our seventh graders, those who wanted to opt into this project, to have the opportunity to help bring stories of family members of Holocaust survivors from our community to our wider community. So these seventh graders spent a few Sundays after Sunday school. They stayed late to do a little bit of learning about the Holocaust in addition to what they're learning in class, to have a session where they specifically did research into the people that they would interview. They took their short biographies and researched where they were in camps and what their family's journey was, and prepared interview questions to try to not only learn about their story, but also learn what it is to conduct an interview and how to try and learn information from someone. And then finally, at our third meeting, they got to observe an interview with one survivor, and then they all had their chance to interview another family member of a survivor. We recorded those interviews, and then we took those recordings, which were each 30 to 40 minutes, and we didn't want everyone to sit through an hour and a half of those interviews, but we were able to bring them down into about a 10-minute video, really highlighting what each of these survivor family members could share about their family's journeys. So I know Rabbi Noah began our service with this, but I also want to echo a thanks to all of the students for the work that they put in learning about these family members and conducting these interviews. And I was there the day they were doing it, and it was an uncomfortable experience of trying to interview someone and ask those questions. And they did an outstanding job. And I believe that we'll see in this video the answers that were shared all came about from the questions our students asked in the preparation that they did. And again, we also want to thank Sam Goldberg for being their teacher and overseeing this project, and Samantha Abramson and everyone at HERC for being our partners in making this project come about. So I'm going to ask John if you can hit play on the video, and we'll have a chance to watch.
Okay, my name's Hannah. I'm 13 and I go to MJDS. And
my name is Raina. I am also 13 and I go to Highland Community School.
Okay, and I'm Judy Silberman, and I taught at MJDS for 25 years. And this is an interview about my parents.
The story I'm telling you is my mother's story.
And my father, the stories he had, it was amazing.
I think it was very hard for them to talk about their lives before, and certainly very hard for them to talk about during the war.
When you talk to a survivor, they don't like to share a lot of stories because they were afraid, embarrassed.
It was a very awful time during the war, and my mother was in Auschwitz. My father was in a labor camp.
So my mom was born in 1926 in Nuremberg. And Nuremberg is, where the Nazi Party started.
In Czechoslovakia, as a matter of fact, I was born there.
East Poland, right by the border of Ukraine now.
My grandfather was an industrialist. He was a successful businessman. They lived in a nice house.
Small farming, some chickens. The mother had made breads. So they went to the city center to sell their foods.
They were German through and through. They were Jewish, practicing Jewish, and they celebrated the Jewish holidays. And I think the Reformed Jewish movement actually started in Germany, and they were part of that movement.
They knew they were Jewish, and they knew they were very devout Jews, and they were sort of denying everything that was going around them.
And I'm sure that her parents tried to protect her, and shield her. And they were such Germans that they couldn't believe that it was happening. They thought, this is nonsense. This will pass over. This is not the, how could this be?
He learned from, obviously, gossip in the city. Heard about the Nazis and the Jews, and they don't like Jews, they hate Jews, they're going to take them to the camps, the ghettos.
Jews were being accosted in the streets, beaten in the streets, or they were being shot, or they were taken to the woods and shot, and then it was very clear.
My father saw the two brothers and the parents taken away, and my father was told by his parents, take your two younger brothers, go in the woods, and hide. The two younger brothers didn't want to go. They want to stay with mommy and daddy. So my father was 18 at that time. He went out in the woods, and he watched his parents and brothers taken.
My grandfather, who was the one who was in denial and didn't want to leave the country, when he realized, probably days before the Nazis came and knocked on their door, he took some of my mother's. My mother was a needle pointer, and she did petty point as well. And my mother was in her mid-20s and still living at home. And he took many pieces that my mother had needle pointed, and a couple of some photographs, which never really survived the war, but he put them in a metal box and he buried them in the backyard. And the box survived during the war. And shortly after he did that, the Nazis came and took them.
The SS came to their house, and they ransacked her closet, and in her room, while she was sick in bed with appendicitis, they came in her room and threw everything out of her closet looking for things, like guns or radios or anything like that. And they took her father when they left, and they didn't take her grandfather because he was out looking for a doctor for her, and he came with an 85-year-old retired physician who was willing to look at her and said that she has appendicitis and she has to have this out or she'll die.
His parents knew some farmers in the area, and they knew my father when he was running around in the woods. They were non-Jewish, so they didn't want to be caught hiding a Jew in the farms, in the barns. So he went at night when everything was quiet, hid in the barns. In the morning, he had to run.
They take her to this Catholic hospital where he thought that she might be able to get care. And as it turns out, the nuns were hiding Jewish doctors in the beds as patients at this Catholic hospital. And so one of them was a surgeon, one of them took her to the operating theater. The nuns the SS came to take the doctor, to arrest him, and they wouldn't let him into the operating theater. So they must have just joined hands and said, you can't go, and they must have felt that they couldn't throw a nun down.
When they got to the concentration camps, they divided people, the Nazis divided people up. You go this way, you go that way. So my grandparents, my mother's parents, and her oldest sister and her oldest sister's children were taken away and never survived. My mother was taken. She was a young woman who was vital and strong. They took her to Auschwitz.
After Kristallnacht, Churchill in England, it was clear that the war was coming. And he said that they would take Jewish children under the age of 17, with 50 pounds sterling, as long as they didn't bring their parents, as long as they didn't bring their family, because they didn't want the parents, and people don't like immigrants, and they, people said they're going to take my job, and oh gosh, did I hear that before? Yes. So, but they did take the children, which was amazing, that they were willing to do it. And so right away, Naomi arranged for Annalisa and my mother to go on the kinder transport, and she sent them.
The Soviet army they saw the partisan in the woods, so they said it'd be good candidates to be part of army. So they they enlisted my father in the Russian army, and that's how he said it was better than living in the woods with nothing. He had at least food, clothing, and weapons.
My mother was on the boat to England with her sister, and since her sister was okay, she felt she was okay. And she was not okay when immediately her sister was taken to, some people would like open their homes, but they were to Annalisa was taken into a family to be a house servant, you know, and my mother was only 12, so right away Annalisa's gone, and my mother said she became hysterical, and then nobody picked her up because she was crying hysterically. And then finally they found somebody to pick her up who didn't speak any German. She spoke no English, and it was a bad fit, but at least they took her in for a short time.
After the war, my mother was in a refugee camp. She was suffering from malnutrition, but when her health became better, she went back to her house that she lived in. She found her way back. She knocked on the door, and there was a Czech family, Christian family, living there. They just took it over because all of these Jewish homes were vacated, and they just moved in. So my mom knocked on the door. They answered the door, and she told them who she was, and she said, "I'm not here to take my house back." But my dad buried a metal box in the backyard, and I came to get that. And they were very kind to her, and they helped dig up the box.
When she was 15, she was sent back to London, and then that was the end of her education. And then she worked as a seamstress and in a munitions factory, and then over time lived with her sister.
And after she died, we had these needle points. We donated the tablecloth to the synagogue, and you could see it. It's not far from the chapel.
Said, "Dad, how did you get out of the army?" "Oh, that was easy. In the woods, it was nothing. It was really hard." He went into town in Moscow. He went into a store, changed his military clothes to civilian clothes. And basically, he walked the other way. And, that's a survivor.
My grandmother and grandfather got out. My grandfather was very, very sick, and he died in Panama. My great-grandparents, my grandmother tried to get them to come with, but they said, "No, we're too old." And of course, they were arrested, and they went from Theresienstadt to Treblinka, which is where they were gassed. So that's how they died.
You guys really need to know all these answers, and the fact that the Holocaust was something that was really real and a tragedy.
History is things you can learn from, and I think that's the thing I want to bring up to students is learn from the past.
So everybody has a story. I'm sure your family has a story too. You should always find out your family's story.
I don't know whether this is on, but I want to thank our families of Holocaust survivors who were willing to give of their time and their stories to our young people, and thank you to our young people for being brave and asking important questions. It is so meaningful to hear those stories, and what a beautiful video and a beautiful legacy that all of these families have brought forward that we can highlight here at Congregation Shalom. And it is now my great honor to introduce Nancy Kennedy Barnett. And though I don't have quite a bio to share about Nancy, because I think we all know Nancy very well, I will say that her father, George, I know that the inspiration that he has brought forward in Nancy's life, and the fact that she is constantly living up to his legacy and constantly has his name upon her lips, is a testimony to the dear and sensitive way in which she lives her life. And now, by telling her story, not only here at Congregation Shalom, but in schools across the state, and telling her story to young people, her father continues to inspire this entire state with the stories of his life and his resilience. And so it is deeply meaningful that Nancy is going to share the story of her father and the story of her family. Thank you, Nancy, so much for being just the source of inspiration that you are to all of us.
Hope I got this right. If the Nazis had been successful, I wouldn't be here, nor would my children and my grandchildren. And this event has shaped my life and given me a special responsibility. Gotta make sure this, oops. I'll get this right. This is a picture of Dad and me from June 2010, 3 months before he died in an accident. Dad spoke to groups at Shalom in the early 2000s, so most of the videos that you are going to see happened in this very room. So he was also interviewed by the Steven Spielberg group, and so some of the videos are from there also. Dad spoke to lots of groups just like this, and so let's meet him and hear why he felt it was so important to educate others on the Holocaust.
First time I was approached about this talk, I had mixed feelings. First of all, I was thinking, how am I going to talk about events that took place a generation before most of you were born? And also, how can I condense lots of things into a short period of time? Same time, I was thinking that I am here, I have to bear witness somebody that you see who actually did go through some of these things that everything actually that I am going to talk about. And also, I remember that there's a saying that those who don't remember the past will be sentenced to repeat it. Yes, it can happen again. Yes, it can happen here. It can happen again. And I think the more you know about it, the more you will try to avoid that it will not happen again.
Soon there will be no survivors left. Their stories are now our responsibility. And that is why I am here, because if we stop telling these stories, they disappear. I grew up in a typical 1950s home. That's me on the left with the in the red little jumper with the bad haircut because my dad cut my hair to save money. I was born 10 years after my father got out of the concentration camp, and this picture was taken 15 years after the war ended. Most of us here can think about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and our life was appreciably the same, not for my father. And now, when I think about all the things that he faced in those years, I am overwhelmed by his strength, and my love for him only deepens. He is the American success story. And growing up, I never knew how my father's story would come up, but it always did because he had a thick accent, he wore clothes that didn't always match, and he kind of looked like he came off the boat sometimes. And whenever we would get together with groups and families, we'd hear about grandmas and grandpas, aunts and uncles. My mother's side had grandmas and grandpas, aunts and uncles, but my father's side did not. At one point, my dad created a family tree of his family on a 7-foot-long piece of paper, and there was more than 100 relatives on it that were alive before the war. After the war, only 3 people had survived. I grew up in the shadow of an erased family. We were always looking at World War II movies. My dad would always have them on, and I would always be looking deep into the faces saying, which one was my grandfather? Which one is my cousin? I never knew, but I was always looking, and something was always missing from my life. And I think that's probably why I stress family so much today. I want to start with one story that I think epitomizes my dad and explains why he was able to survive. My dad got a note saying he was to show up at the train station in 3 days, and he didn't know where he was going, for how long, or if he would be coming back. He packed his backpack with a few things, his mom gave him some clothes, and his father gave him the equivalent of about $4 to use only in an extreme emergency. And there were many times that $4 could have bought him a loaf of bread, but my dad never used it because he didn't know if sometime that $4 might only buy a piece of bread, but that piece would save his life. And he went through the entire war with it neatly tucked inside a shirt pocket. He had many searches and complete strip searches, but he never spent those $4. And no, I don't know what happened to it because a lot of people ask me afterwards. So my dad, he was very sure he had that $4. It was always that inner strength. And he had said to himself that unless a bullet got him, he was coming home. As far as he knew, his parents were there, and he needed to get back to them. My dad always said he survived because he was lucky, and there's an element of luck in every survivor's story. And sometimes Dad made his own luck, but he also made the choice that he was going to survive, and he did whatever it took to survive. People want to know, that people know about the German story, the Polish story, but not that many people know the Hungarian story. My dad was born in Budapest. That's the capital of Hungary. Hungary was anti-Semitic, but that really didn't affect Dad all that much. He went to Jewish schools, K through high school. He only interacted with the non-Jewish community and businesses. Hungarian Jews were very assimilated. They spoke Hungarian, sometimes German, never Yiddish, the Jewish language. They considered themselves Hungarians whose religion was Judaism. And in the 1930s, Hungary had a population of about 10 million people. 2/3 were Catholic, and Jews made up about 6% of the population. By comparison, at that time, Jews were 0.5% of Germany, and today Jews are about 2.5% of the United States. Most Hungarian Jews belong to the middle class, including my family. My grandfather was a member of the Budapest Transit Authority. I had other members who were sheet metal workers, furniture makers, electricians, and they lived an ordinary middle-class life. They took vacations, they visited relatives on Sundays, they worked their jobs. My dad had a rowboat that he went on the Danube. But both of my dad's parents families had lived in Hungary for generations. They had no relatives anywhere else, and there's no safe place that they could have gone. My dad was born in 1923, and life was normal for a while. But in the 1930s, life began to change.
And as we were leaving schools in the 1930s, there were a bunch of bullies across the street with a little kid, 6 or 8-year-old kid. The little kid was sent across the street and kicked into our shin bone, punched us in the face. So you had two choices: slap the little kid back, at which point a bunch of bullies came and beat you up, or just stand there and suffer from that little 6-year-old kicking and spitting and beating you.
Although the Holocaust happened over 80 years ago, the dehumanization at its center still exists today. Learning about the Holocaust is so important because it reminds us what can happen when hatred and prejudice is left unchecked. Not being able to enroll in a university, my father became a bricklayer.
I wanted to go to university. Well, the Hungarians were bringing Jewish restrictive laws. They called it numerus clausus, which means closed number in Latin. That they said there are 6% Jews in this country. We will accept only up to 6% Jews in universities. Of course, they didn't accept even the 6%. They took the 6% out of the number of converted Jews, Jews who became Christians. I wasn't one of them.
And after 30 years of service with the same company, my grandfather lost his job. They said to him, "You have to understand, times like this, we can't protect you." And the pension that was promised to him was not paid, and his insurance protection stopped.
They said, "Don't worry, if anything happens here, anything bad, we will protect you. You are our favorite Jew." Then, when things got tough, all of a sudden the same people said, you must understand, in times like that, you cannot stand up for a Jew. And we were left alone.
Hungary became one of the Axis powers and in 1940 aligned itself with Nazi Germany. But by 1941, life had started to get more difficult for under German influence in Hungary. Jewish restrictive laws were enacted, and laws that stated that in order to prove that you were Hungarian, you had to have actual birth and marriage license records for over 100 years. Of course, nobody had those records going back to the 1830s, so all of a sudden, overnight, people lost their citizenship. Jews were thrown out of parliament, people lost their jobs, stores owned by Jews were closed down, and signs started showing up that said, "Dogs and Jews not wanted." Citizenship was erased overnight. Imagine waking up one day and your government tells you you're no longer a citizen. For my father, that meant he went from being a student with dreams to being a target. Although an ally of Germany, Hungary initially refused to deport Jews with Hungarian citizenship. But with the Axis tide turning, Hungary began to seek a separate peace in early 1944, attempting to extricate itself from the war. However, in March of 1944, German troops marched into Budapest. Adolf Eichmann was sent in to establish special details for implementing the final solution to the Hungarian Jews. Between May 15th and July 9th, just 2 months, Adolf Eichmann and his accomplices deported over 437,000 Hungarian Jews to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where they were murdered. I went with Jim and my mom and dad to Hungary in 1991, and he told me about his life on March 19th, 1944.
And here is the bridge. It used to be a railroad bridge. It was a different one because the original was bombed down. This is the new bridge that was put up after. And on March 19, 1944, which was a Sunday, we were out here to row boat during the weekend. And all of a sudden we started seeing German aeroplanes, bombers, flying and circling above the bridge and about this area. So we saw that something was wrong. We walked toward the bridge, and there were the SS soldiers standing there with their machine guns, and we went home. And when we got home, we found that many people were already taken into railroad cars, never to be heard from later on, and our life completely changed.
What kind of people were taken?
People who were named, and they had lists of people who they went to, who were active in organizations that were possibly dangerous to the Nazis, Zionists and politicians, everything. So they went to houses, plus anybody who was anywhere close to a railroad station. If you walked within a block or two from a railroad station, and if you were circumcised, that's the first thing you look, you were Jewish, and then was taken away because they considered that you're trying to escape. And that's why you're going. Those days nobody flew, so it was just railroads. And thousands and thousands of people on the same Sunday were rounded up and taken away. And our life completely became different.
Jews from all regions of the country except the capital city of Budapest were deported. As I already said, all of my dad's relatives lived elsewhere. They had no place to go. They were immediately sent to Auschwitz and were murdered. The Hungarian Jewish community was subjected to the most ruthless and concentrated destruction of all of the Holocaust. And what makes this particularly horrible is that this destruction in 1944, it was 2 years already after the establishment of the death camps and well after the murder of the rest of European Jewry. As a healthy 20-year-old, my father was able to do hard work. So my dad was ordered into a slave labor camp on April 17, 1944. He was ordered to report in with only the clothes on his back and food to eat for 3 days. And on their last night together in their apartment, and when we were there, Jim and I were able to actually go into that apartment, and I stood with my father as he told me this story, that his father said to him, I know the Allies will win the war. I just don't know if we're going to be here to see it. And my grandfather was partially right. He didn't make it, my dad did. My dad's unit was marched towards the Russian front to dig ditches in no man's land for fortifications. There was over 40,000 of these slave labor camps. My dad's camp wasn't a named camp, but he was ordered to cut down 100-foot-high pine and fir trees in the Carpathian Mountains, carry the cleaned-up trunks down the slopes of the mountain, and build roads with them so that the military convoys could drive over the mud. They worked from 4 in the morning till 9, 10 at night. In the meantime, rockets are going back and forth over their heads, and when they were done, they just had to stand in formation, straight and silent. He had no winter clothing, just the clothes on his back. He slept in those same clothes, all the kinds of weather. Daily food was a cup of coffee, a cup of watered-down bean soup, a cup of black bread, maybe black bread made out of sawdust. Sometimes that bread would be so small that they couldn't even divide it, so the Nazis would give it to the Jews and say, "You divide it among yourselves," trying to create trouble between the two of them. But my dad did what he could do to resist. You know, that backpack my dad brought, one of the things he brought was his tallis. He had his prayer shawl with him. And even though he got up at 4 in the morning, my dad would get up a half hour earlier, put on his tallis and pray. Just to do something on his terms that he always did gave him that inner strength. He was doing something that they could never take from him. People would ask my dad, "Why didn't you escape?" Again, let me remind you where Hungary was. There was no place to go. All the red is Nazi Europe. Earlier I said that there's an element of luck in every story. Here's one story of my dad in luck.
April 44, they took me into labor camp, and the situation in Budapest became very, very rough and bad.
What do you mean? What was happening? How was it rough?
Jews were pulled together with no reason. Jews were killed, shot. Jews were put into camps, taken out to Galicia, to Poland. They disappeared. We don't know where they took them. Without any rhyme or reason, they just took Jews away. My father lost his job. He was working for 30 years at that point for the same, as I mentioned, semi-civil service job. Jews started to were forced to wear yellow, big 4 or 5 inch diameter Mogen David. And they were taking us to camps. And first these camps were labor camps. I don't know when my camp turned from labor to concentration camp. They didn't put up a sign, so I don't know what. And I wasn't in any of the big name camps like Mauthausen or Buchenwald or Auschwitz. I was in little small places in Hungary, in Poland, Slovakia. I was liberated eventually on the Austro-Hungarian border. There was one time when I tried to escape when I knew that the Russians are coming closer to the place where we were. And this was in Galicia. And I stayed back with a friend of mine, and we hid in the haystack in a peasant house. And my group left, and we saw the Hungarian peasant go to the SS and reporting that a couple of Jews are hiding in the haystack. So we ran out and we ran after our group, and a Hungarian officer caught me and started screaming at me. He took me next to a ditch, took his gun off, pointed at me, and he said, "Jew, jump," so he doesn't have to bury me. And I was absolutely frozen. I stared at him, and I didn't jump. And at that point, a higher ranking officer came over to this one and took him away for some other duty, and I ran away. This is what I consider luck. It was August 13, 1944. I remember the date. There was snow on the ground in the Carpathian Mountains. And I said, if I am without clothing, I am wet, I am sick, I'm working impossible work. If I have to be here during the winter, I would die. So I decided to do something about it. The something was, while carrying one of the 100-foot high, two of us, pine trees, I fell and I hurt myself a little bit. I stayed down. I said I broke my thigh. They got the gun and get up. It was double or nothing. I won. I said I can't get up. My thigh is broken. And for some reason they believed me. They sent me to a so-called field hospital where they x-ray. So I figured in the x-ray will tell there is nothing wrong with me. I moved, so the x-ray was fuzzy. They gave me bandages, which kept my leg motionless. At night I removed the bandage so I could exercise and move my leg. And that went on for a while. Eventually, they shipped me out of there into what we got to know as concentration camp. That was my bonus.
My dad suffered terribly during the war in the elements. No shoes, dressed poorly. After the war, he'd love to go outside and play. And there's lots of things that I now, looking at my father's life through the lens of the Holocaust, I understand. But I just didn't realize it then.
During this time in Budapest, they were catching the Jews, tying them together with a rope. They were very careful with bullets, didn't want to waste bullets. They tied together 10 or 12 Jews, lined them up next to the Danube, shot one, the one fell into the Danube, and because of the rope, pulled the others with him so they could kill 10, 12 people with the same one bullet. At that time, this was winter time already, the Danube was full of ice, so obviously they all died there.
And if you go to Budapest today, that's the monument for the Jews that were killed that way. One of my dad's teachers was one of those people.
We were marching and we were taken to a brick kiln. And at that point, we had no jobs, no work, nothing to do, just to lie next to each other. Again, this tight, we were lying next to each other, and the bread became so small that they couldn't cut it small enough. So they took one piece of bread, they gave it to one guy, and he says, "You divide it amongst the four of you." It was so small, it was impossible to cut it into 4 parts. And we were in the brick kiln, lying next to other guy. Next to me was a quite famous engineer from Hungary. I happen to know his name. And he died next to me. And I did not report his death, because this way I could get next day's beet soup, and I could eat it. So I slept next to the dead one. So what? One day they were coming and they said, "We'll need volunteers for work." Lots of us volunteered because the worst thing was to be inside the kiln next to sickly people. Most of us got typhoid fever. I got typhoid fever. I survived because I was lucky. And I volunteered and I was selected. And what was the work? We were burying some of our bodies. While doing that, somehow I got hold of an apple. So I lay down in the grave next to the dead ones, and they ate my apple. It didn't bother me. You were finicky, but I was a very finicky eater before the war. I decided that time that if I ever survive, there will be nothing that I will refuse. And I think I think Nancy can testify for that. I don't not eat anything.
Some of the stories were just horrific.
A very minor punishment was tie your hands together and like an animal in this fashion, they pulled you up onto a rope similar to being lynched. And when your body is out, you like this, you pass out in a minute or two. Then they let you down, or pull up again. They were really just very, very cruel happenings, cruel people, unreal people. You cannot imagine that any nationality would do it. But as I started saying, yes, it can happen again. We are not any different than they were. They are not worse or better. So we have to very much watch so it doesn't happen again.
This is a picture of my grandfather, Ungar Mor Miklos. Miklos is Nicholas. I'm Nancy, named after him. Of course, during that time, my dad had no contact with his family, and he didn't know what was going on in Hungary. The head of the Hungarian government, Miklos Horthy, stopped the deportations in July and tried to reach a truce with the Soviet Union that was just on Hungary's borders. But in mid-October, the Germans ousted Horthy and installed the radically anti-Semitic Arrow Cross Party. The Arrow Cross Party ordered the remaining 70,000 Jews that were still in Budapest into a ghetto area covering just a few blocks. Jim and I visited that area with my parents in '91, and you could still see the bullet holes. On October 20th, Nazis came into the apartment building where my grandparents lived and took every male, including his dad. They marched them west towards Austria. My dad never found out definitively what happened to his father, but from facts he learned after the war, he believes he was taken to Mauthausen. While this was happening in the fall of '44, my dad's unit was also marching towards Austria, several hundred miles away. Along the way, if you couldn't make it, you were just shot. My dad survived because he was relatively strong, he was 20 years old, and he was lucky. My grandmother was taken to the Budapest ghetto.
My mother was taken to the Budapest ghetto, which meant a small area of apartment buildings where they put 20 to 30 people into one room. Not in an apartment, 20, 30 people in one room. They didn't have 2 toilets, they didn't have 2 bathrooms, 2 kitchens, one for the whole apartment. In each room, they had 20 to 30 people. So most people just got sick. My mother got very sick. She survived liberation and died afterwards of it.
And here's a picture of my grandmother, Hermina Schick. And Mor Miklos, Ungar, and Hermina Schick, if those names sound familiar, you all walked in under the Ungar Schick portico as you entered Congregation Shalom, and that is named after them. My dad was liberated on Easter Sunday, April 1, 1945. One day the Nazis just came in, one day the Nazis guards just disappeared, and the next day there was a tank and an airplane battle outside of the kiln where my father was. My dad said it was like a movie, except for he was in the movie. The next day, no one was there, and he just figured he was free. He looked up at the sun, knew Budapest was to the east, and started walking. I don't know if you can see this map, but he's on the Austro-Hungarian border at Sopron. He walked from there to Budapest, about 130 miles. Today, that would take about 2 days, 2 hours on the highway. It took him 16 days to walk home, arriving home April 17th, 1945, exactly 365 days after he was taken. When he got home, he found his mother, who had been liberated in January, and she was alive, but still very sick. And the first thing she said was, "God kept me alive so I could tell you what was happening during that year."
I weigh in the 140s right now. And that was about my weight before. I came home, I was 70 pounds. I have a photograph of me 2 weeks after I arrived home, which was already, I felt I was somewhat juvenated, recouped already. But at that point, I was 7 months.
And here's that picture. Look at the blank stare, no affect. 21 years old, weighing 70 pounds. And what did my father do when he got back? The very next day, he enrolled in the university because he knew that getting an education was the key to rebuilding his life. He said, my parents want me to be an engineer, and that's what I am going to be. Dad was often asked if he felt anger towards the Germans for what happened. He said that he didn't, but his actions were a little different. His last name was Ungar. He changed that. Why did he change it? Because Ungar means German and Hungarian, and he didn't want anything to do with Germans. Also, as you know, on Yom Kippur, you fast. My dad was a religious Jew. He brought his tallis. That first Yom Kippur, he went into the refrigerator and filled his face with food. In 1946, when my dad was in college in Budapest, a friend told him about an academic scholarship to the United States. My dad applied, and in November of 1947, my dad arrived at Texas A&M University and became an Aggie. Education was my father's revenge, and he built his life with knowledge, not hate. It's a picture of my dad on the left from A&M, and then my mom and dad at their wedding, 1953. With no Hungarians around him, my dad was forced to assimilate very quickly. From Texas A&M, he applied and got another scholarship in Madison. From Madison, he was an engineer, structural engineer, floated down to Chicago, where he met my mother, and they met on a blind date, and they were married 8 months later in 1953. My dad became the successful engineer that his parents always wanted him to become. He felt that they sacrificed their lives for him. He said he never would have applied for those scholarships if they were still alive. My dad had a true zest for life, loved to travel, loved his family, really emphasized the values of family education and hard work to my sister and me, and we in turn instilled them in our children. Unfortunately, my father died too young at the age of 1986 because of a freak accident. He fell off a 3-step stool and changing a light bulb, hit his head, and had a brain bleed. But the day that he died, he played tennis, went out to lunch, ran some errands, came home, watched Jeopardy with my mom, said he felt tired, laid down to take a nap, and he never woke up again.
If one thing stays with you, it should be that if something bad happens, start speaking up against it at the very beginning. That's the easiest time to do it, not when it is already out of hand and you can't stop it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
What I've learned and how I live my life, if something seems wrong to you, speak out at the very beginning. If you hear dehumanizing language used about a person or a group, do not accept it. Call it out and don't let bad behavior be normalized.
I feel that I won. I am here. They didn't succeed in exterminating me.
My dad always said he won. That was his watchword. He won. He was the victor. They didn't succeed in killing him. Even after being enslaved in the concentration camps, losing all his weight, only weighing 70 pounds, my dad always felt that he won. This is a picture of my sister and me, our children and grandchildren, taken at Thanksgiving 2024. My dad was really proud of us. Since this picture, 5 more children have been born. Throughout his life, he was always beating the Nazis, and it drove him to create and build a successful career and a loving family. I keep my father alive by sharing his story. My dad won. I now need your help to keep winning. My dad's victory was his family, and I carry his story. You know a lot more about me now and why I do what I do. I think you guys all know me. You have an idea of why I do what I do. And now it's your turn to do what you have to do, to remember that never again starts with us. Thank you very much. I can take questions if people want. Sure.
If anybody has any questions for Nancy, you can ask them now. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Nancy, can you tell the congregation the reactions that you get from the students throughout the state of Wisconsin and wherever, or the other organizations that you speak to, non-Jewish students and people hearing stories like this?
Sure, David, thank you. David asked if I would tell some of those stories since I do go out. I've been speaking for 10 years telling my dad's story. We're really fortunate because Herc does such a great job of preparing the teachers for preparing me to go in, that they usually ask some very intelligent questions and really smart ones. A lot of times what people do is they want to know, how did it affect me, or what have I done? I think one of the real interesting things, if you remember back at the bridge, and my dad talks about what happened March 19th, 1944, and they talk about known Jews. And one of the things I tell people about is you got to be really careful with social media and things that can happen in death threats. I personally got a death threat on the 10th anniversary of 9/11 because I'm a known Jew. We went to the FBI, but when you look up me, I was president of the synagogue by then. I wasn't president, I hadn't been in the JCC. And it's really, to be careful about what's out there and how you do things and not to do a lot of bullying. When I go there, I really try to, it's not just a history lesson. The kids can learn history from their teachers. I try to make it applicable to their lives. A lot of times they'll just ask questions. How did I feel about my dad? Was he angry? Not as many questions as you might think, and I think that's a credit to the teachers. So thanks for asking that, David. Yeah, Bonnie.
When your father left for the States, had his mother already passed?
Yeah, she asked when my left for the state. Yes, my grandmother died in 1946. My dad got out in 45. She died in 46. He applied in 47. He never would have applied for a scholarship without it. Yeah, Maureen. Thank you. She asked if I've changed my talks, or how have I since the rise of anti-Semitism. I have not. If anything, I really try to look in the eyes of the people when I talk about getting involved, stopping things at the very beginning. I used to talk about Charlottesville. I've taken that out because so many things have happened since Charlottesville. I really want people, there's so many parallels to what was happening in the early 1940s to what has happened to the immigrants here in America today. And so I really try to emphasize that type of things, but it's always been in my talk, Maureen. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you. There you go.
John, I'm hoping that you could actually put the picture of Nancy's family back up on the screen. Nancy, don't go anywhere. Because what we're about to do is we're about to do Kiddush, and that's when we rise together and raise a Kiddush cup high. And the reason why we stand for the Kiddush is because in actuality what we're doing is we're bearing testimony. And when you bear testimony in a court, you stand. And being able to bear testimony of your father's life and the goodness that has come from your father's life and seeing the blessing of your family standing in front of you, I think it's only right that we should stand with you. As Nancy, if you would hold the Kiddush cup on our behalf so that we can taste the sweetness. And the sweetness is of the time and the love and all of the goodness that your Father has brought into the world through you and through your children and your children's children, and God willing, your children's children's children. And may that legacy always be preserved. So let us join together in the Kiddush.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho b'ahava uvratzon hi. הנחילנו זיכרון למעשה וראשית, כי הוא יום תהילה למקראי קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים. כיוונו בחרת ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים, ושבת קודשך באהבה וברצון הנחלתנו. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. אמן.
L'chaim. We are going to turn now to our final hymn for the Shabbat. Our final hymn can be found on page 371. Page 371 as we join together in Ani Me'amim.
Ani Ma'amim, Ani Ma'amim, Ani Ma'amim, Ani Ma'amim, B'emunah shalema, b'yad HaMashiach, ve'af al pi shehimanea, im kol ze ani ma'amin, im kol ze achake lo b'chol yom sheyavo. Ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
I'm really proud of our community.
I thought the video was outstanding. We have to figure out how many minutes between Shalom and her. I mean, it was so
I don't think we can not do this again. We have to, I think, announce the next group of kids.
Absolutely.
We have to continue.
It's so important.
It's really amazing.
You know, it's just great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
I'm
you.
going to leave this here till I come back after the honor.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
we'll have to
Yeah,
deal with it.
absolutely.